The Legend of Korra is an action beat-em-up style fighting game from Platinum Games, who also made the Bayonetta series and Vanquish. It is based off the popular TV show from Nickelodeon, The Legend of Korra. You play as Korra, the current avatar. It is a fighting game in which you use bending abilities, which are basically just spells in the form of air, earth, water, and fire, to dispatch of and deal with opponents that you have to fight. The game begins with Korra leaving a pro bending game. She sees an old man in an alleyway who she believes is being attacked by triads, only to be attacked by chi blockers herself. After being chi blocked, you basically spend the game trying to regain your bending abilities, starting with your fists and going through each element. Which is really just lazy writing and gameplay, because if you watch the first season of the show, you will know that this is a recycled plotline from the first season of the show. And unfortunately, this story is really uncompelling. The old man who's the main antagonist just doesn't really have any character or depth, and he doesn't even show up that often, only at the beginning and the end. The game is separated through a series of chapters, taking you from Republic City to Air Temple Island and so forth. They are usually connected through a small cutscene, which is really cool, because the actual animation quality of the cutscene is very similar and on par with the actual show. The transitions, unfortunately, are really bad. You never know exactly what you're doing or how you got there. It's just kind of like, now you're in Air Temple Island, now you're in Republic City, randomly you're back to Republic City again. It's just confusing, and it makes the whole experience feel very disjointed as you're sort of teleported around from one area to the next. It's also really unfortunate that none of the other characters aside from Jinora actually ever show up. I would have loved to have had Mako, Bolin, Asami, or any of the other really familiar, cool characters from the show show up. And Jinora herself is kind of a bit of a joke. She's nothing more than a contrived way for the game to communicate with you about how to advance your bending abilities since they've been blocked. And there's a scene in particular in which Korra is talking to Jinora, and Korra is like, I'm being attacked by chi blockers, and Jinora is just kind of like, oh, well, you can get your spirit powers back here, and it just seems kind of silly. She doesn't seem concerned or anything. She just doesn't feel like a real character. She feels really robotic. And the combat is by far the strongest element of this game. It feels very fun and fluid, and it captures the spirit of the show in both look and feel. You really do feel like a bender as you master air, earth, water, and fire. And all the elements feel fairly well fleshed out and have very well designed abilities and things, so it's very fun to actually use and play them. You can be sure that if you like one particular element, you will find that it is very well done, very well fleshed out in its own in this game. There is also a few sequences in which you ride on Korra's pet Naga, sort of an on-the-rails linear experience, kind of breaking apart and moving out of the way of obstacles. Honestly though, they're kind of boring. It's kind of like an old school game, and it's just not really interesting. It does help to break up the monotony though, which is nice, and they're usually really short that you can get through them very quickly. The biggest problem with the combat is that it's very repetitive. You'll fight the same chi blockers, the same triads, the same mechs, and the same boss battles over and over. It gets really tiring. I mean, to be fair, at the end of the game it does open up a bit with some spirit battles, but not by much. There's also quite a few boss fights, which are kind of frustrating. The game doesn't always communicate what it wants you to do, and the final boss just goes on for way too long. There's also a shop in which you can buy different items, abilities, and stuff like that as you progress through the game. And it's staffed by Iroh, everyone's favorite character from the Avatar series, which is really cool. And the boss fights are also really frustrating, because they're all based on these 1 second counter intervals. You have to perfectly counter him, otherwise you just get destroyed. The margin of error is just way too high, and you can get stuck there way too easily. The difficulty is also really frustrating because it can go from relatively easy to impossible in a few seconds, and it doesn't always explain to you what you're supposed to do, leaving you confused and stuck. And the camera angle is one of the worst parts of this game. It'll get stuck on walls or inside of people so you can't even see anything, and it's just like, I need to attack. I'm trying to kill somebody, but I can't even fight them because it's like stuck on a wall or something really ridiculous. Overall, The Legend of Korra is a game which I give a 5 out of 10. It just falls short on the mark. The gameplay and the fighting end feels really solid, but the story is just so pathetic. I can't even believe that the show writers were somehow involved in this joke of a story. The game is only about 3 to 5 hours long, depending on how far you get stuck with certain bosses, so it's not particularly long either. This game also really has no replayability at all. There's a pro bending mode, but it's kind of boring, it's uninteresting, you're probably not going to play it. And there's some costumes and items you can unlock, but you're not going to be compelled to go back and replay the game just to get them. I wouldn't recommend this game unless you come into it with, I just want a fighting game with bending abilities. Maybe then you'll have fun for $15, but for the rest of us, this game is just not worth it at all.